At 2:17 local time, the tactical picture stopped looking like a screen and started looking like a collapse. The first tracks came in low and scattered, just enough to irritate a watch team, not enough to terrify one. Then more appeared. Then more behind those. Different bearings. Different speeds. Some skimming low over the water. Others higher, cleaner, faster, descending through layers of atmosphere with the kind of geometry that means nobody on that deck is sleeping again. And somewhere in the center of that widening storm was the target Iran actually wanted. The carrier. Not because it was closest. Not because it was easiest. But because an American aircraft carrier is not just a ship. It is a floating argument about power. A moving air base. A command node. A symbol visible from orbit and unforgettable up close. If you want to send a message that echoes across every naval headquarters on Earth, that is the hull you try to break. And Iran's planners understood something dangerous. You do not kill a carrier strike group by being dramatic. You kill it by being mathematical. The first layer of the attack was never meant to sink anything. It was meant to occupy attention. A wave of cheap one-way drones, slow enough to be despised, numerous enough to become a problem anyway, came in first from offset angles. Their job was simple: force the defenders to classify, sort, assign, and burn time. Time is life in naval air defense. A destroyer can kill a missile. A cruiser can kill a missile. A combat air patrol can kill a missile. But first, somebody has to understand what deserves killing first. That was where the pressure started. Inside the carrier strike group, the defensive web was already active. E-2 airborne surveillance overhead. Destroyers screening wide. A cruiser acting as the air defense quarterback. Electronic warfare teams leaning into the spectrum. Combat air patrol fighters pushed outward, trying to stretch the engagement zone before it folded. Inward toward the high-value unit at the center. On paper, that is exactly what a modern strike group is designed to do. But saturation attacks are built to turn paper into fiction. The drones kept coming. Not in a perfect wall. In clusters. Broken timing. Uneven spacing. Just enough disorder to create decision fatigue. Some were obvious decoys. Some were probably carrying real warheads. A few altered altitude at the wrong moment, forcing reclassification. One vanished into sea clutter and reappeared 30 seconds later on a shifted track, just enough to poison confidence in the picture. The defenders stayed disciplined. They did what trained crews do. They did not panic. They sequenced. Outer air interceptors went first. Fighters pushed down the longest lines. Shipboard missiles handled leakers. Electronic attack tried to fracture guidance and disrupt coherence. The goal was not perfection. The goal was thinning. And at first, it worked. Tracks disappeared. Icons blinked out. Several inbound drones died so far from the formation that nobody on the carrier even felt the attack yet. The strike group was doing what it had been built, drilled, and deployed to do. Then the arithmetic changed. At 2:26, fast movers appeared behind the drone mass. Not one. Multiple. This was the real compression point in the attack, the moment where a competent defense begins to feel overloaded not because it is failing, but because it is being forced to solve too many different problems inside the same minute. Cruise missiles entered from divergent vectors, sea skimming where possible, using the earlier drone clutter to complicate clean assignment. Their profiles were different from the first wave. Faster. Smarter. Less forgiving. Now the strike group had a bandwidth problem. Every defensive layer has limits. Not just in missiles, though magazine depth matters. Not just in radar, though radar matters more than most people understand. The real limit is simultaneous understand. Ding. How many tracks can be identified, prioritized, handed off, and engaged without the architecture starting to lag behind the attack? Iran's doctrine has spent years circling that question. Not, can one missile sink a carrier? That is the wrong question. Can enough threats arrive close enough together, from enough axes, with enough variation, to force the defense into a sequence it cannot survive? That is the question. And on this night, they came close to answering it. In the carrier's Combat Direction Center, no one was speaking in dramatic language. No one needed to. Range rings were shrinking. Weapons officers were reallocating. Pilots were burning fuel faster than anyone liked. The screen was full, then fuller. The attack had stopped being a strike package and become an administrative burden of death. Every contact demanded something. A look. A judgment. A weapon. A gamble. On the cruiser, the tactical action officer had already stopped thinking in terms of individual threats. He was managing failure margins. Which tracks could be delayed? Which had to die now? Which ones might be deceiving the formation into spending expensive interceptors on cheap targets while something faster remained masked behind them? That is the secret violence of saturation warfare. It forces even the defender's successes to become liabilities. Each intercepted drone proved the system worked. Each interceptor fired reduced the margin for what might be coming next. Then came the descent warnings. Ballistic. That single word changed the emotional temperature of the entire battle. Cruise missiles are terrifying because they are intimate. They come low, late, and hard. But ballistic anti-ship threats create a different kind of fear. They fall into the fight from above, compressing decision time, exploiting geometry, and arriving with speed that makes every delay feel fatal. The earlier waves had not been the main blow. They had been the hands forcing the shield open. Now the hammer was dropping. Iran's deadliest weapon in this scenario was not merely a missile body with a warhead. It was the combined logic of the strike, drones to distract, cruise missiles to divide, ballistic weapons to finish. A layered attack designed not just to break steel, but to overload process. To make every radar sweep and every launch cell count against the Americans twice. By 2:31, the strike group was fighting in stacked layers. Fighters out front. Destroyers wide. Cruiser tight on command logic. Carrier maneuvering, not wildly, but enough to complicate terminal targeting and preserve spacing. That last part matters. People imagine carriers as giant, helpless runways at sea. They are not. They are huge, yes. Valuable, yes. But they are moving warships embedded inside one of the most complex defensive formations on Earth. The problem is not that they cannot move. The problem is that against a properly timed saturation strike, movement alone is never enough. One radar operator on the screening destroyer noticed it before the room was ready to call it. The ballistic tracks were not converging cleanly on the carrier's last known course line. At first glance, that made no sense. A targeting error, maybe. Spoofed data. Bad telemetry. But he kept staring at the update pattern and saw the uglier possibility: the ballistic threats were not all aimed to hit. Some were aimed to force the formation to displace in predictable ways, nudging the carrier into a narrower maneuver corridor while the sea-skimming weapons approached from the bearing most likely to exploit the movement. It was not a single attack. It was choreography. That insight mattered because it changed what defense meant in the next 90 seconds. The strike group did not just need to intercept. It needed to refuse the attack sequencing. Refuse to let Iran decide which layer fired first, which ship turned when, which radar focused where. That is where high-end naval combat stops being about machinery and becomes about disciplined human judgment. The operator elevated it. Fast. The air defense commander cross-checked. The pattern held. The formation adjusted. Not elegantly. Urgently. Certain intercepts were delayed by seconds to preserve geometry against the higher priority descenders. Electronic warfare shifted emphasis. A destroyer on the outer screen accepted more risk on its own bearing to keep a cleaner lane open for terminal engagement deeper in the formation. Fighters were redirected not toward the loudest part of the raid, but toward the segment most likely to become decisive 3 steps later. This is what separates competence from collapse in a real saturation attack. Not bravery. Not slogans. Sequencing. At 2:33, the sky started breaking apart. Interceptors climbed. One threat vanished high. Another split into debris and flame. A third kept coming longer than anyone liked, then died so late that men on exposed decks saw the flash before they heard anything. Sea skimmers reached the inner defensive belt. Close-in systems woke up. Decoys were thrown. Electronic noise thickened. The formation's clean geometry dissolved into pure survival mechanics. One cruise missile crossed inside a range that no commander wants to discuss calmly after the fact. It died, but late. Too late for comfort. Fragments struck water close enough to throw spray across the night like shrapnel rain. Another inbound weapon was lured offline just enough to miss the carrier's hull and slash into the dark beyond, still lethal, just no longer history-making. Then one of the screening ships took the cost. Not the carrier. One of the ships protecting it. The hit was not catastrophic, but it was real. Damage. Fire. Shock. Men thrown. Systems degraded. And that matters strategically because a strike group is not a collection of interchangeable silhouettes. Every escort ship represents radar, missiles, command capacity, electronic warfare, and maneuver space. Remove one node, and the group does not just lose steel. It loses thinking. Iran's planners would have counted that as progress. The battle still was not over. A second ballistic descender made it deeper than the Americans wanted. Terminal defense engaged inside a brutally short window. That kind of intercept is not cinematic from the inside. It is procedural terror. Numbers. Confirmations. Cross-checks. Launch. Wait. Reacquire. Verify kill. The people performing it are not feeling heroic. They are trying not to be the reason a 100,000-ton capital ship becomes a fireball broadcast around the planet. The intercept happened. And for a moment, the whole battle pivoted. Because saturation attacks feed on momentum. Each leak, each near miss, each damaged sensor, each diverted interceptor pushes the defender closer to cumulative failure. But the reverse is also true. If the defender breaks the sequence, if the most dangerous layer is blunted before the architecture fully buckles, the attack can begin to unravel. That is what happened here. The surviving inbound tracks did not vanish. This was not a clean victory. It was worse than that. Messier. Harder. More expensive. But the strike group had bought itself enough breathing room to re-establish order. Fighters recovered the outer lanes. Ships resorted priority targets. Damaged systems were bypassed or rerouted. The wall reformed, thinner than before, but still intact. And once a carrier strike group regains rhythm, the attacker's window closes fast. The final missiles were met by a defense no longer improvising minute to minute, but recovering its logic. One died far out. Another lost guidance. A third was forced low and finished by a ship that had already spent too much and was still spending. The swarm that had looked unstoppable 15 minutes earlier now looked what it always becomes if the kill chain breaks. Fragments. Burning fuel. Broken timing. Expensive wreckage sinking into black water. By dawn, T. He carrier was still afloat, still operational, still launching aircraft. That fact alone would dominate headlines. But it would miss the real story. Because the truth is not that Iran's deadliest weapon failed because it was weak. It failed because even a well-designed saturation attack must do more than arrive. It has to sustain pressure long enough to collapse the defender sequence. It has to keep the target confused, divided, and behind the timeline. And on this night, the American strike group did something Iran had built the entire attack to prevent. It kept thinking. Not perfectly. Not cheaply. Not without damage. But clearly enough to survive. That should worry everyone watching this kind of warfare evolve. Because the lesson is not that carriers are invulnerable. They are not. Anyone saying that is selling nostalgia. A modern carrier can be found. It can be tracked. It can be saturated. And if enough layers fail at once, it can absolutely be hit. The deeper lesson is colder. Future naval battles may be decided less by the biggest missile than by who controls the engagement sequence under overload. Who can see through clutter? Who can preserve magazine depth? Who can distinguish the decoy from the finisher? Who can refuse to let a saturation attack dictate the tempo of the defense? Iran came at the carrier with the right theory, not one weapon, but many, not one angle, but several, not one problem, but a stack of simultaneous problems designed to consume time faster than humans can think. And for several long minutes, it nearly worked. That is what makes this kind of attack so dangerous. Not that it guarantees a kill, but that it can create a battle where even the strongest fleet in the world is forced into razor-thin margins, where one operator's judgment matters as much as $1 billion of hardware, where success and catastrophe are separated not by dominance, but by seconds. In the end, the carrier did what supercarriers are built to do. It endured the strike, preserved the air wing, and remained the center of combat power. But the strike group paid for that survival in interceptors, in damage, in stress, in revealed limits, and in the memory of how quickly the sky over the sea can become too full to manage. And that may be the coldest part of all. Iran did not need to sink the carrier to prove the future had arrived. It only needed to show that even America's most protected warship can be pushed into a fight where every layer is busy, every second is expensive, and every surviving ship knows the next wave could be worse. Because once saturation warfare becomes precise enough, cheap enough, and coordinated enough, naval power starts living on arithmetic. And arithmetic does not care how legendary your fleet used to be,